Hi again, everyone. We're going to sit down and take a look at lenses today, and hopefully, this gives you a really good sense while I can't be in the classroom of exactly how lenses behave. So, let's get started. Things you should be able to do. Just like with mirrors, lenses can produce real images or virtual images depending on the type of lens and how far an object is from the lens itself or from the focal point. So we'll look at the differences and similarities there to mirrors. And then, just like with mirrors, we'll take a look at, all right, how is the image presented? Is it upside down or right side up? So that's what we mean by orientation. And then magnification. So is it the same size or larger or smaller than the object actually is? Give a second to yourself and see if you can think of some places or situations where lenses are used. We've talked about them a bunch in class already. And then again about what purpose do they serve. So why do we use lenses for things? See if you can come up with some examples. I'll give you some time. So probably a lot of the things that you thought of are you'll see in the upcoming slides, and we'll see if we can provide some really good examples of how lenses behave. So first off, there's two types of lenses that we're going to be looking at, but the basic principle of lenses is that they change the direction of light. So we talked about refraction. Well, refraction is the bending of light, and so when we have these curved pieces of usually glass, we're bending light in different directions. So just like the pencil submerged in the cup full of water where the rays of light were bent, we use lenses to do much the same thing. So just like mirrors, we form different types of images, but refraction instead of reflection. And again, just like with mirrors, we're looking at the images formed as either real or virtual depending on the distance. So two types of lenses we're going to be looking at: converging lenses and diverging lenses. So to converge means to meet. So if we have a converging lens, in general it's thicker in the middle than it is at the rim, and you probably have seen something like this before. And so we get those rays of light to converge after they pass through the lens, meaning they meet. If you take a look from left to right here, the light passes into the lens, and then those rays of light meet out here at the end. So those rays of light converge. By comparison, diverging lenses are shaped the opposite way, so they're thicker at the edges than they are in the middle, and so as light passes through divergent lenses or diverging lenses, then it bends away from the center, and so we get rays of light that scatter a little bit more and they don't meet after they pass through the lens. So those are the two types of lenses we'll be looking at. So let's spend some time on converging lenses, and we'll take a look at what happens at different distances to the image as we look through a converging lens. The first thing we'll look at is an object that's an infinite distance away. And by infinite distance, we just mean sufficiently far enough away from the focal point. So any object that's sufficiently far away. So you get all of those rays of light sort of come in and they make one focus point, and you don't get a real image. And so if you think about the malicious child who's got a magnifying glass, the rays of light of the sun are very, very far away. And so if you allow those rays of light to converge, they all converge at one point. You get this sort of really focused image where all those rays of light end up at that one point, and you don't actually get a picture, and not much else happens, except if you're feeling like torturing small animals. If you have an object that's slightly closer than infinite, you can see an inverted image. So if you think about what you see looking through a magnifying glass at something really far away, well, that image gets inverted, and so you get something that looks a little bit like this. If you have an object that's a little bit closer than that, you get a smaller object, and this is really what we start to see in the human eye. So if you think about how the human eye works, we get an image that's out in front of the lens, and then that image gets actually flipped upside down as it passes through the lens of the human eye, and that smaller image gets projected back onto the retina, and a signal gets interpreted there and travels down the optic nerve. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at an object that's a little bit closer to infinity. We get this sort of upside down image in the exact same way that we get here, where the rays of light converge and then we see them sort of after they converge, and we get this image projected on the back of our eye here that's actually upside down, and our brain's smart enough to turn that right side up for us. Just a little bit about corrective vision, because this is probably something you thought of when I asked you to give examples of lenses. Well, glasses, contacts do really the same thing. So when we're talking about corrective vision, one condition you could probably have is hyperopia, which is otherwise known as farsightedness, and you correct that with a converging lens. So farsightedness means that the rays of light don't converge soon enough, and so you get a little bit of a blurrier image as opposed to seeing it right at that nice sharp focal point. And so if you add a lens here, you converge the rays a little bit before they actually get to the lens of your eye, and so your eye can do the rest of the work and converge them at the end. Couple more cases here. So if you have an object that's closer than twice the focal length, in that distance you get a magnified image, and so you would see something like that in a slideshow or a movie projector where the lens of the projector is really, really close to the light source, so somewhere in between twice the focal length and the focal length, and so you get that magnified image that's right side up. And then at the focal length, you get these rays of light that never converge. Again, not a super useful form, not a super applicable distance for using a converging lens, except for things like searchlights. If you're thinking of the bat signal, that's a pretty good example, but not often used sort of in everyday life. And then the last possible case, if you're actually closer than the focal length, we get this virtual image, and we get a larger image that's projected on the same side of the lens. And this is exactly what we've seen before. We get this fake image where we actually see something that's much more magnified than it is before. So this is probably what you're most used to seeing as far as a converging lens, is that distance that's really, really close, like a magnifying glass. If any of that seemed confusing or too fast, now would be a good time to pause and maybe rewatch those last 5 or 6 slides, given those different distances for where the lens is. And again, something that's worth starting to commit to memory. So I've given you another little chart here that I think is worth filling in or taking notes or making sure that you can kind of memorize these different little distances. We're now going to switch to diverging lenses. So converging lenses, the rays of light converge at some point. They meet at some point on the other side of the lens, whereas diverging lenses, those rays of light never meet. So if you take a look at the image in the top right of your screen here, instead of a magnifying glass, you might even think of it as a shrinking glass. So the things that we're looking at, those rays of light actually never converge, and we would see the letters actually smaller than they were before. So we only get virtual images in these diverging lenses, and they're only upright images that are smaller than the original. So they take those rays of light and they kind of shrink them down a little bit, and so we see things as smaller than they actually are, which is a little bit abnormal. And there's not a ton of practical use. You'd never see this sort of magnifying glass that doesn't magnify in a store. It doesn't come up a whole awful lot. Except for things like viewfinders or looking through older cameras before they had nice digital screens. But those are actually used to shrink down an image so you can see the whole thing, but in smaller, so you can see a wider angle, but smaller than you actually see here. So if you look up here, it goes from A to F. We can see almost the whole thing inside of this at a very, very wide angle. And then again, to bring up corrective vision, the most common sort of vision that needs to be corrected is called nearsightedness or myopia, and divergent lenses are used to fix that. So what happens with myopia, instead of hyperopia where you don't focus soon enough, in myopia you focus too soon, and so your muscles aren't good enough at spreading out the lens enough, and so you actually focus too soon, and then those rays of light converge, and when they spread out again you get kind of that blurry image. So when you have this concave or diverging lens, you actually spread out the rays of light a little bit here, and the rays don't converge too soon, and so you can again line up that nice little sharp focus point right with your retina at the back of the eyeball. So that's the basic idea there. So we covered a lot of information here in the last 10 or so minutes. I strongly suggest going back and watching this one or two more times, especially take a look at that chart with the summary of what happens with a convergent lens and move forward from there. If you have any questions, please email me. Otherwise, I'll see you on Wednesday.